Welcome back, I'm Raiden from Bluewood Gaming, and this week on Raiden Reviews, I'm taking a look at Hellsign, the game where you fight the supernatural with knowledge more than guns. And before I bestow some knowledge on you, I do have to say that I received a code to review this from the developers, so take that as you will. Now let's get into the actual review, starting with graphics. And this is the first place that we find a little bit of disparity in the game. The environments themselves look amazing with an excellent use of lighting to give a creepy atmosphere that this game is going for. But some smaller aspects like the UI and the door models look just a little unfinished in comparison. Although this is an early access title, so there is still time to fix that. As for frame rate, I didn't have any problems with it, even on the highest settings, and I think that even some lower end computers will run this game just fine. Next, let's move on to sound, music, and voice. As for sound, this is another section where we see the good mixed with the bad. Now, I do have to say that there are more good sound effects than there are bad sound effects, but the bad sound effects are mixed in there often enough that you do notice it every time that you play. The biggest offender of bad sound effects right now is the weapons in the game. They all need to be beefed up a little bit because you definitely don't want weak sounding guns in your game. And right now, the guns just don't have that punch that we really want them to have. On the other end of that, though, the sound effects that are done amazingly are the atmospheric sound effects, like the houses creaking, your footsteps, the use of different gadgets have sound effects, and all of that is done wonderfully. The only part of the ambient sound effects that I really don't like is throughout most of the missions, there'll be like this hum that is behind everything and goes for pretty much the whole time, and that is really not needed and kind of takes me out of the moment. And next, moving on to music, there's really only two places where you'll find it. That is the bar setting, which I'll get into a little bit later when I go into gameplay, and then the actual overworld where you can get missions and whatnot. And the only thing that I can really say about most of the music in the game is that it feels kind of generic. Which doesn't mean that the music is bad, it just means that the music is forgettable, which means that it might arguably be as bad as if the music was bad. And next, let's move on to voice, of which there's barely any in the game. Every time you die, one line is said to you, and the details of which are kind of story related, so I won't spoil that here. But the voice is done very well. It's just that's the only place in the game that has voice. So now let's move on to story. In Hellsign, your player-created character wakes up with no idea of who he is or what he does, and sees that he has a giant tattoo on his back that looks quite abnormal. He quickly pieces together small parts of his life and starts taking on jobs dealing with supernatural entities in his city. And that is where we start getting into gameplay. As you've been seeing from the background footage, the game is a third-person isometric twin-stick shooter. The only thing is you're not shooting or even getting into fights as often as you would think you would. Let me explain. Basically, you are a freelancer that gets to choose your own missions, and you get paid based on what missions you do. The thing is, most of the missions that you'll be taking are just investigation missions, which involve no combat whatsoever. You're basically going to a place and figuring out what sort of supernatural entity is actually at said place. There are missions called extermination missions where you go to a place and exterminate or kill whatever supernatural entity is at said place, but so far in my time playing, there have been way more of the investigation missions than there has been the extermination missions. And this is encouraged from a gameplay perspective as well. See, every mission that you do, you are paid based on whether or not you complete the mission. In an extermination mission, if you happen to die while fighting the supernatural entity, then you don't get paid. But if you go into an investigation mission, you are much more likely to actually get paid and paid well because you're not actually getting into a fight with anything. Also, during the investigation missions, you learn more about the supernatural entities in the game, and so when you take that knowledge back to an extermination mission, you're much more likely to do well. Overall, this just leads to you playing more investigation missions, which is something that I don't really think a lot of people know about going into this game. And now let's move on to my final thoughts. Personally, going into this game, even with the knowledge that I had about it and knowing about some of the sort of investigation missions and whatnot, I thought that this game was going to be much more of the horror run and gun twin stick shooting, because that's what a lot of the promotional material showed off, was these gunfights with supernatural entities. And then I started playing and boom, get hit with a bunch of investigation missions where you don't actually fight anything. From there, I pretty quickly found out that this wasn't exactly my kind of game, but I didn't really want that to affect my judgment of it. So let's get into actually scoring it. Personally, I think that if this is your kind of game and you are fine with doing all the investigations to actually figure out the weaknesses and the different signs of the different supernatural entities in the game, then this is going to be great for you. And with the $15 price tag, there's not really much that you can do to beat this. And for what's here, most of it is actually quite good. If you're not into the whole investigation missions and you want something a bit more faster paced, then you're not really going to find that here a whole lot, just because the sheer amount of investigation missions that you do have to do in the beginning to kind of gain your knowledge on all these different types of entities that you'll be running into. And that's pretty much all that I have to say about Hellsign in its current early access form. I might actually come back to this game when it gets a full release, because even though the investigation missions weren't exactly my style or what I would want from a game like this, the rest of the game was still interesting enough for me to play it for quite a while. If you have a question or comment, just leave it in the comment section below. If you like this kind of review, I upload a review almost every single week, so subscribe and you'll get notified for those. And as always, I'm Raiden from Blue Gaming. I'll see you guys in the next one.